I think they're becoming more increasingly aware. I think people are asking more questions, and people are more willing to have their voice heard. That's why I'm speaking here now.
I don't think most of them really communicate with like the public. Yeah, they say like, oh, we're for the people, listen to the people, what they want. But I don't think they really take into consideration what public opinion is on certain issues.
I think that's one of the challenges of politics right now, is that a lot of politicians are advocating for their districts, and I think right now, like with gerrymandering and how districts work out, I think that they're not often in touch with what's going on for very many people.
I feel like they're not in touch at all. I feel that like they're insulated. They're, again, this very small sliver of the political and corporate and financial elite are insulated from the rest of the world, the rest of the country, you know, the rest of the 99.9%.
So, is Capitol Hill in touch, or are the concerns of the public valid? Our experts said this.
Well, they aren't. They aren't in touch at all. But neither the parliamentarians in London, the parliamentarians in the National Assembly in France, or I would hazard the guess, probably not in Japan or anywhere. The fact is, they all live in their little political villages. In Washington, it's called Inside the Beltway. In London, it's called Inside the Westminster Village. They get their news about constituents from their assistants, who are on the ground, who take telephone calls and answer letters, or through the columns of local newspapers. It is not right. But the problem is that modern government is so fast-paced and so complex that they really don't have the time. You know, they just have time to go from lunch to speech to caucus meeting to dinner party to cocktail party. They don't have time really to spend a lot of time with their constituents. And so they've ended up becoming divorced from them. And as I said, this is not restricted to Washington. Washington is possibly more important because of the fact that it's a superpower, but every country in the world has this problem, and it has to be dealt with by every country.
Politicians around the world are out of touch, and that means, I mean, especially in America, because you think about how much money you have to spend to become elected, not just as a president, but also as a governor or a senator. And these people are incredibly rich, and they don't understand, they don't actually see the day-to-day struggles of ordinary people. So when it comes to not having enough food to heat your house, not being able to afford to get a train or afford to keep a car to get to work and having to get buses, and you know, just ordinary daily struggles that you and me have. The politicians here or in America, they don't understand that. They've come from a different class, and they don't understand real everyday life. You know, one of the popular questions to MPs and politicians across the world is about how much does a bottle of milk cost? And they don't know that half the time, because they don't interact with ordinary parts of daily life like the rest of us. So, you know, I don't think they're capable of really representing us in that manner.
This led us to a rather challenging and thought-provoking question. Which current or former American politician do the public distrust the most, and why? Here's what they said.
I don't have a specific person. I just mistrust, like, all of them, generally speaking. Like, I just don't think that they're doing a good job. Like, I'm like a liberal Democrat. That's like what I identify under, but I'm more like independent now because I just feel like nobody can do a good job. Like, both sides are working for their own agenda, and then they are unable to work together.
Okay, well, I guess the one I distrust the most, that'd be Bush Jr. I definitely wouldn't trust him with anything, let alone politics or even the care of my cat.
It'll have to be just people in Congress.
I think just the House in general, because I feel like they're on their own regimen and their own like schemes and stuff, and I have no idea what their intentions are really, so I don't trust them at all.
Probably George W. Bush. Distrust him because I felt like he had an agenda with a lot of the things that he was doing, and it wasn't necessarily what the people wanted.
I'm still very embittered by the George W. Bush administration and the endless, tax breaks for the wealthy, and the aggressive war under false pretenses, the profiteering and the cronyism that was rampant in his administration?
I don't know if I would say so much as one person. I think this system is such a complex, and it's very like hierarchy and money based, and I think it's not just so much one person, it's the whole system. Like, it's a big thing, but if I had it my way, I think we would totally start over. I work with the juveniles in the justice centers, so I see mostly the politics and how it affects like our youth in the justice systems, which is just filled with flaws.
The question of trust is an ever-present one in politics. We asked our experts to share their view on which politicians in the world's most powerful nation are also the least trusted.
The worst US president in the past, well, in the 20th century, and certainly in the past 100 years, was Warren G. Harding. That's a surprise, isn't it? You expect me to say something else. Warren G. Harding presided over the most corrupt administration in American history. The second worst, by just a whisker, was George W. Bush. And the reason he was so bad was because he allowed a political ideology dictated to him by a group called the neocons, neoconservatives, allowed them to dictate the foreign policy on the basis of a political ideology and not on America and the world's best interests. They still believe back during the Bush administration, they still believe that America has a God-given right and responsibility to impose its political structures and philosophies on the rest of the world. And that they have the right to act unilaterally to do so. We're still living with the consequences of that.
I think when it comes to distrust, it has to be Henry Kissinger. He was the man who, during the Vietnam War, chose to extend it, chose to carpet bomb Cambodia, chose to, basically increase the deaths of people 100-fold. And it wasn't just in Vietnam and East Asia. There was examples of his brutality and his callousness in Latin America, in Africa, in all of the global South. And I think that man has kind of set the tone for people to follow. So Henry Kissinger has to carry that award himself. But coming carefully, very closely behind him are the two George Bushes and Ronald Reagan, who merits a special mention in Distrust because he was one of the architects of neoliberalism, a system which has devastated so many lives.
What one thing would you most want to change about the way America is run? That's the question we put to the public.
Well, I'd like to have it so that there's less money involved in the elections, and so that it's more so like people's opinions more run it, and I guess probably have more parties too.
And use our money wisely instead of like really wasting it.
We need a third party. The two-party system is not working.
I think that everyone should just chill out over like the petty stuff, because it always seems like we're fighting over things that we shouldn't even have to fight over, like some stuff that the government shouldn't be involved in, like abortion, like pro-life and pro-choice, stuff like that.
I wish that the middle class was a lot more involved in the government. I feel like if the middle class was more involved, then the government would help the middle class more.
Like, the public opinion should weigh heavily into the laws that are being made, because some laws that the public support don't get passed.
They need to get more about the people, honestly, because like even though they say that they are representing America, they really aren't. They need to get down like to where we are and like see how we live and see what we actually want instead of just assuming things.
Right now, the gerrymandering process allows for people in Congress basically to choose the people who are electing them, as opposed for the people to choose who they're electing. So I think it gives a huge advantage to people who are already in power. They already have the name recognition and the financial backing of a lot of people, but not only that, but now they get to choose the people who are putting them in power every 10 years when a census is held. They get to choose the people to handpick them to get back into office. So if we had maybe some sort of an outside board or some other group making decisions on who's electing politicians other than the politicians, I think that would help put power back into the hands of Americans to be able to have a say in who is electing.
It's an intriguing question, and one we gave to the experts.
The American Constitution. When it was written in the 18th century, the American Constitution was an ultra-radical political document, way ahead of its time. And it was perfect for its time. It was designed to create the development of a young country in a virgin territory. And during the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, that's exactly what it did. But by the mid-20th century, the US was a mature superpower. And the Constitution that had been written back at the end of the 18th century was not really applicable to its current position. I'm particularly concerned about the system of checks and balances which are built into the Constitution. It was designed to protect the citizens from political abuse. But what it has ended up doing as government has grown in size is hamstringing the elected representatives. The result is virtually a political vacuum in Washington, and that political vacuum is filled by the special interest groups who can move much more quickly because they're profit-driven and much better organized and much more efficient.
I think to improve America, I think it has to go back to the money thing. At the moment, only the very rich can get elected. Only the very rich can represent people in Capitol Hill or in local government. They have to have a lot of money behind them. And I think that has got to go. If we can start to get ordinary people elected, and I would say, let's go so far as to say anyone being elected should be paid the average of the people they represent. And if you have it like that, then necessarily they will fight for a better deal for everyone, because their own income or their own wealth depends on on benefiting everyone in their constituency. So if we can do it that way, we can get people acting in the interest of people in power, rather than what happens at the moment, where they're acting in the interest of corporations, big business, and their own fat wallets.
The authority of the United States is in large part dependent on the credibility of its politicians, but it seems that members of its population do not trust the decisions taken on their behalf by the people on Capitol Hill. It didn't have to be this way, but the more the United States government ignores the wishes of its people on these important international affairs, the weaker its global standing becomes.